Good morning. There we go. Thank you for attending Inside the Writer's Studio. My name is Andrews-Katz. I'm the author of the Agent Buck Knight 98 series and of the Greek fantasy Tartarus. To my far right is Greg Herren. He's a vastly prolific writer of mysteries, young adult, and erotica. He's worked as an editor for Lambda Book Report, Bella Books, Hayworth Press, and currently at Bold Strokes Books. Please welcome the multi-Lambda Literary Award winner and Saints and Sinners co-founder, Greg Herren. The lovely lady between us is Miss Jewelle Gomez, originally from Boston, is the double Lambda winner of the Gilda Stories, the only lesbian fiction novel not to be out of print in the last 25 years. She's written short stories, plays, and poetry, all to great acclaim. Please welcome Miss Jewelle Gomez. First question to both of you. Who were your earliest influences in becoming a writer? Greg, why don't you start?
I don't know, it's hard to say. I started reading when I was really young, and I read everything I could get my hands on. But I would say, as far as writing mysteries are concerned, probably my biggest influence as a mystery writer is John D. MacDonald, and who I love. Even though now I read him and think, Jesus, what a sexist bastard you are. Travis McGee and his magic wand. but I read a lot. But I always say John D. MacDonald because Chance McCloud, Travis McGee, I kind of stole the name and played on the name. And the original idea for the Chance series was I was going to do colors in the titles too, like Travis McGee. And that was too derivative, as I found out. But yeah, I'll stop now.
Jewelle, who are your influences?
It's funny because I named my book of essays after something Travis McGee said. He said about being older that when you think about it, you only have so many Septembers in your life, and you should just savor them. So I wrote an essay called 43 Septembers, because I too really enjoyed Travis McGee before I came to consciousness. Before I got woke. So I would say my earliest influence was James Baldwin. My father had Baldwin when I was a teenager, and I read it. I didn't understand it. Like when I was 13 or 14, I didn't quite know what it was all about because his language was so dense and beautiful, and Another Country was so sad. But I knew when I finished reading them, I was either going to grow up to be a gay man or a writer. And then Joanna Russ, lesbian feminist, speculative fiction writer, was like my icon. I thought she was so bold, and her work was so mysterious and sexy, and I wanted to be able to write things like she wrote, which was you're reading along and suddenly, bam, something improbable happens, and exciting happens, and her characters were so snarky sometimes. I really, and that was before I read Octavia Butler. And then when I read Octavia Butler, all bets were off.
Jewelle, most people are surprised to find out that you were on the founding board of GLAAD, the Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation.
Yeah.
What was your part in helping getting this organization on its feet?
Well, I worked at the New York State Council on the Arts at that time, and I worked with Gregory Kolovakis, who was the director of the literature program, and I was his assistant. And so he started going to these meetings, and everyone was going to meetings because it was the 80s, and people were totally, for good reasons, freaked out. And so he started going to these meetings, and he came back to work. He was gay, obviously. And he said, Jewelle, you have to come to this meeting. We're trying to start an organization to make the media responsible because they're demonizing gay men, and really it's, you know, a short jump from there to a lot of other things. So I said, oh, Gregory, I can't go to another meeting. I already got my lesbian meetings. I got, you know, my cocktail meetings. I can't go to another meeting. And so he kept asking me, and finally I was walking down the street, and Vito Russo, the, you know, lovely film writer, was walking toward me.
Celluloid closet.
Celluloid closet. And he said, so when are you coming to the meeting, Jewelle? Oh, I was thinking this week. Vito. You can't say no to a guy named Vito. I don't care if he wasn't that tall or big. You don't say no to a Vito. So I went, and it was really very heartfelt because everyone was panicky, but they figured out a good strategy, I thought, which is the Daily News and the Post, which the headlines were so horrific. You would have thought that, you know, The Walking Dead, that's what they were talking about, gay men as if they were The Walking Dead. And so we started having meetings at the New York State Council on the Arts after hours. People would come, and we'd use the photocopy machine, and, you know, all that stuff you do when you're a revolutionary young person, and have a regular job. And so that's how I got involved. And so they then started, they want to incorporate, you need specifics. So they decided that, you know, Gregory would be the executive director, and I would be the treasurer, which is kind of a joke since I can't actually count. And then we went to the, I don't know if they still have this, Bank Leumi, which was an Israeli-based bank in New York City, to open an account in the name, you know, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And so we just called it GLAD. And they thought, you know, we were just a happy little group. And they thought for some reason that Gregory and I were married because we were opening this joint account. And that was my involvement with GLAD, and I was, I guess, for about 4 or 5 years, and then they moved on, and I moved on, and look what they've become.
Greg, 2002 saw the publication of Murder in the Rue Dauphine. Quote from Julia Smith, funny and witty and a pleasure to read. J.M. Redmond says, quote, what a great romp. Herren does a wonderful job of capturing the flavor and the ambiance of New Orleans. So how did you first come around to creating Chance McCloud?
Oh, I totally was ripping out John D. McDonald. Chance is 6'4" and has gray eyes and was a football player, a college football player. Travis McGee was a pro football player. He's 6'4", weighed 220 pounds, and had gray eyes. I just thought it was interesting to try to write about, to take a traditional mainstream character and make him gay and put him in New Orleans. The funny thing about the ambiance of New Orleans was I started writing that book in 1998, and by the time that it came out, almost all of the places I wrote about in the book had closed. And it's really kind of, whenever I go back and read it, which is painful, excruciatingly painful, never read your old work, it's kind of nice because it is a time capsule, because it reminds me of places that no longer exist. There used to be this wonderful coffee shop on Decatur Street called Caldy's Coffee Museum. And now it's one of those tourist convention where you sign up for tours place. But it was wonderful because you would walk in and there was this gigantic papier-mâché statue of a leprechaun that had been on a float from Mardi Gras the day it was rescued. And they had Viennese cream on tap. And it was just an amazing place, and everybody in the neighborhood and the quarter used to hang out there, and the artists, and they would have poetry readings and stuff, and it was wonderful. It was my favorite place in the quarter, so I always would hang out there, and so I wrote about Caldy's, and then 2 years before the book came out, it turned into a convention and tourist bureau office in condos, which is now everything in the French Quarter. But I wanted to write about gay New Orleans because no one had written about gay New Orleans. And when I started reading gay literature, gay and lesbian literature in the 1990s, I didn't know it existed before the 1990s because of the horrible places I had lived. Fresno. And so one of the things that was really curious to me is that most of the literature was set in either New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles, and there really wasn't anything other than that. I thought, well, New Orleans is like at the time, had become one of the most gay-friendly cities in the country, and there's always been a gay community in New Orleans going back many, many, many decades, and it's like, why is no one writing about this? And so I decided I was going to write about it, and I have never looked back. But and since then, obviously, my reading wasn't as extensive because there was obviously other books about other places in the country. I just, the vast majority was New York and Fire Island and San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it's like, wow, there's no gay people anywhere else in the country. So that's why I did it, and I've actually enjoyed it a lot. And it's really, you find out later, when you're doing stuff and when you're in the midst of doing stuff, like I didn't realize that I'm the only person now, me and Gene Redman are the only people who have actually documented queer life in New Orleans before Hurricane Katrina. And the culture is gone now. The pre-Katrina culture is gone now. So we have a weird place in New Orleans literary history, which just creeps me the fuck out.
In 2003, you wrote Bourbon Street Blues. William Mann says, quote, crackling with all the steamy heat and erotic adventures of New Orleans, this is a sexy noir for the 21st century, I couldn't put it down. Michael Kraft says, quote, Bourbon Street Blues shines as the first installment in a delightful new suspense series. You introduced the world to Scott Bradley, another gay detective in New Orleans. How do you keep them separate?
Oh, it's really easy. It's really easy. Scotty, I created Scotty as a reaction to Chance, actually, because Chance is so depressed. I mean, it was so, I kind of based Chance's background on my own. He has horrible right-wing fundamentalist parents who live in a horrible small town, and he escaped all of that and dealing with his angst and so forth. And I wanted to create something at that point in time, and again, I'm being incredibly general, but it seemed like there really weren't any funny gay fiction books. Everything was angst and coming out and dealing with this and dealing with that drama and this drama and that drama and how terrible life is to be gay. And it's like, well, if a gay man grew up in the French Quarter with hippie parents, he would be a lot of fun. And so I kind of started writing it that way because, plus when the Chance book came out, I was writing the Scotty book. It's so funny how this all played out, how Scotty came to be. One night during Southern Decadence in the late 1990s, my partner Paul and I were standing on the balcony at the Bourbon Pub looking down at a sea of shirtless gay men in the streets, which is lots of fun to look at. And I just had this image of somebody running through the crowd in a thong being chased by guys with guns. And I thought, that's really kind of funny. And then I started playing with it a little bit in my mind. It's kind of a Hitchcocky thing. It's like we're a stripper during Southern Decadence, which is, if you don't know what Southern Decadence is, it's like gay Mardi Gras over Labor Day weekend, where hordes of gay men descend on the city and party and just are out of control for 4 or 5 days. It's my favorite time of year. And it just got to be really, really funny. So I started writing this. I was talking to the editor at Kensington because I was working in Lambda Book Report at the time, and they were launching a line of gay books. I was just talking to him on the phone, and I just casually said, would you ever be interested in publishing a book about a mystery thriller about a gay stripper in New Orleans? And he goes, I would love to, send me a proposal. And I'd never written a proposal before, so I just made up something and I sent it to them. They signed me to a 2-book contract. And that's how Scotty happened. And then when I was writing the book, there was something missing. There was just something that I wasn't quite getting right. And then the Chance book came out and I started getting ripped in reviews about stereotyping and gay stereotype. And oh, great, another gay stereotype. And blah, blah. I was like, oh, you want to see a gay stereotype? I'll show you a fucking gay stereotype. And the great irony of that is here's Scotty, who was working as a personal trainer, makes extra money as a stripper, has parties, drugs, sex, you name it. Never once has anyone ever called him a stereotype in a review. And it's like, that is the stereotype. And people loved him, which was really kind of weird to me too, because I was braced, I was ready for it. It's like, they're gonna come for me now. But it never worked out that way, and people still, it was only supposed to be a one-off. I was only going to write 1 book, and then they offered me a ridiculous amount of money to write 2, and say no to money. And now I'm writing the 8th one, 16 years later, and it's like he's still alive, and he's still going strong, and he's older, but...
It doesn't run quite so fast.
Doesn't run quite as fast, and it's weird because I was at a conference last year, and the moderator brought up about how I was like the only person to ever write about a throuple in a continuing series, and I had never even thought about it. It's like, well, Scotty has 2 boyfriends. He just has always had 2 boyfriends that he lives with. And it's like, oh, it's historic. Here we go again with this historic. I don't know. It's like, I just thought it was funny, because I wanted to do something out of the ordinary and blow up the write the most stereotypical gay character ever. And that's what I set out to do, and nobody thinks he's a stereotype.
Jewelle, in 1991, the Gilda Stories were published. Linnell Moyes, author of The Haiti Glass, says, quote, "This all-American novel of the undead is a life-affirming read." Cecilia Tan, author of Black Feathers, says, quote, "With hypnotic prose, Jewelle Gomez shows the immense power of fantasy and the untold story of American history." How did you create and why did you create Gilda?
I think there were two paths to Gilda. One, I was raised by my great-grandmother, who was born on Indian land in Iowa, and she told lovely stories, so that sense of history and passage of history was always interesting to me. And the fact that she, as an individual who was born in 1883, could then sit with me in my living room and watch a person land on the moon. I just thought, oh, time travel, in a way. And then the thing that actually precipitated the first story, which I've talked about several times, and I think I write about it in the new introduction. I was standing on the street in the Upper West Side. I come down to use a phone booth. Remember those?
Superman.
Yeah. And I must have not paid my phone bill, which was very common in the 80s. And so I came down to call a friend. It was like a Saturday night or something. And these 2 guys came walking by and really felt they had the right to tell me all of the things they were willing to do to me sexually. It was like the most regular street harassment known to womankind, and it still happens all the time. So anyway, I'm talking to my friend Marianne, and I had a couple of glasses of wine, and they start with that, and I just could not handle it. I was already annoyed that I was behind in my bills, so I had to go to a phone booth, and I went, I said, "Marianne, could you hold on for a second?" And I dropped the phone, and I turned around and I started screaming at them, "You fuckers, I'll fucking kill you if you don't get the fuck away from me! You know what I'll do to you if you don't get away from me!" And then their eyes go, and one of them was very insistent. And I'm looking around, trying to find anything around I can use. And I came at them as opposed to backing away, which I also think that physical reality really freaked them out. And one of the guys said, man, she's crazy. Get away from her. She's crazy. I said, yes, I'm crazy, and I'll kill you before you get to the end of that block. And boom. And meanwhile, I hear my friend Marianne going, Jewelle, on the phone. And I came back and said, I'm fine. She said, what's going on? I said, nothing. I just almost killed these two guys, but I have to go home now because the adrenaline was racing through me, so I could not. I was like, so I went home and thought, I got to write this down. So I started writing down what happened because I needed to get it out of me. That kind of horror. I mean, literally, if there had been something there I could have picked up and hit them with, I would have. But it was West End Avenue, and there's never anything on the street. Not even dirt. So, but I had to get it out of me, so I started to write. And in the original story, which isn't in this Gilda novel, in the original story, she actually does kill the guy. And then I had to make it even more of a catharsis. And I have her pick him up and throw him 2 blocks into, the river on the other side of it, the Hudson River. So I was really thinking about that, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. She's really powerful. I wonder who she is. And so then I went back and I rewrote it as a story, as, these guys harass this woman on the street, not realizing she's a vampire and has these superpowers, and she ends up, killing him, and so, which I later changed. But that's really how the story came about. It was adrenaline driven, and my social conscience just could not handle. I was my own Me Too movement.
I'm sure you faced every kind of block trying to get a lesbian woman of color vampire novel published in 1991. Would you have the same issues if you tried to get it published today for the first time?
I don't think I would have the same issues. I was turned down by every major publisher in New York. Fortunately, Firebrand Books, a lesbian feminist publisher, was gearing up, and she was really interested. Nancy Mariano was interested immediately. But I got the most bizarre rejection letters from the mainstream press. One of them said, well, it is interesting, but your main character, she's black, she's a lesbian, and she's a vampire. That's too confusing.
Which one confused them?
I know. I'm 2 out of the 3. Guess which 2 I am. What's confusing? It's bizarre. And one publisher said, we already have our woman of color this year, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think it was a confluence of the conservative nature of publishing in general, and the times, that period, they just were not ready for anything like that. I think today, yes, they would be ready if I went back to them. Because City Lights Books did this 25th anniversary edition, and they're known for their progressive, they grew out of the beat movement, and they're all aging hippies. Thank goodness for aging hippies. So I'm hoping they'll do the second installment of the Gilda Stories.
Both of you have been an editor for anthologies at one point or another. What do you look for as an editor, and what turns you off from a submission immediately?
Not following the goddamn guidelines. It was really, really funny because it's a great laugh line, but it's true. And I say this all the time when doing editorial panels and stuff. It's like you've got 200 or 300 submissions, and you have to winnow them down somewhere. You start going through them, no guidelines, didn't follow the guidelines, didn't follow the guidelines, didn't follow the guidelines. Because realistically, if you don't follow the guidelines, to me, it's like, okay, well, you're already not doing what I want you to do. You're already proving to me that you're going to be hard to work with. So, nope, don't got time for you. Sorry, got to go on. It's really tricky, and I am just finishing an anthology that I'm editing now that I can't believe I got suckered into doing again. Because I had pretty much decided I wasn't going to do anthologies anymore. Many years ago, I decided that I was never going to do an open call for anthologies again. I would only work with people that I had worked with before, or if I found somebody new that I was interested in their work. And so I started doing closed anthologies. The last time I did an open call for an anthology was in 2007 or 2008. And I had asked for people to actually submit them in hard copy, and I got blisteringly nasty emails from people demanding to know why I was discriminating against people who were too poor to afford printers, straight women, I might add. And I wrote one back.
Oh.
And I just said, this one had emailed me and said that I was discriminating against people who were disabled and couldn't get to the post office and couldn't afford postage. And I wrote her back and said, but I bet they'll get to the bank to cash the fucking check.
Touche.
And that was it. I said, I'm not doing open calls anymore. The one I'm doing now is the BoucherCon anthology for the BoucherCon Mystery Conference in St. Petersburg this year. I did the one 2 years ago when I was in New Orleans. And this one was a little bit easier. This is easier because it's a blind read. And it's amazing how many people don't put their names on a blind read. Reject. And I don't have to read the stories. I just have to edit them. So what happens is it's a blind read. So they go out to, they're assigned to readers who pick the stories that go into the anthology. So I'm absolved of all responsibility on that level. Though it doesn't stop people from demanding to know why I didn't choose their story. It's like, well, I didn't choose anybody's story. But anthologies are an interesting thing because I'm always interested. I don't want the same story. I want different points of view. I want different characters. I want different things. I want diversity. I want different voices. I don't want the same story over and over and over again, just told by a different person. And that's why it was so much easier to choose when you just pick people to write stories for you, because you know you're going to get something different from everybody. And that becomes an issue when you're doing an anthology, because you can get 3 stories that are all really good, but it's the same story by 3 different people, and you can't use all 3. So then you have to figure out which one you're going to use, and that's kind of the reason I don't really like doing them anymore. I hate telling people no. No, I really do.
Jewelle, what have you learned as an editor that you didn't realize as an author, and how has being an editor changed the way you write?
Well, I had the very good fortune of co-editing an anthology with the late and very delightful Eric Garber.
Swords in the Rainbow.
Swords in the Rainbow. And Eric was so fabulous, and I learned so much from him about editing. And one of the things that I learned right away about doing the anthologies is pick people you can work with. Pick people who understand or are willing to learn about the editing process. And as a writer, I've always felt editing was very, very important. And when I talk to writing students, I always tell them, you're going to spend as much time editing your work as writing the actual work. And if you don't believe in that, there's really no point in you going on to be a writer, because you're going to be irritable when editors want to work with you on your piece. And so figuring out a way to communicate to the potential author, we may have some issues that we want you to address, and we like your story, and we may ask you to tweak this or tweak that. How do you feel about that? And if people get an attitude saying, you know what, you love the piece, but we can't really work on it. Because it's all to make a piece sharp and good, and if you're not accustomed to working with an editor or comfortable in working with an editor, that's not going to be helpful to the process. And I don't want to get halfway down the line and have somebody still battling me because I tell you I think such is weak, or can you buff up this section? And it is particularly annoying. I remember this so clearly. I said to this person who had submitted something, I'm a little bit concerned because all the characters who are like the bad guys are, how can I put this, people of color. I said, you know, that's, I'm not saying people of color aren't bad. I know many of them. But you have to think about as you're, well, how is this going to come across to other people? And boy, we battled. We arm wrestled. You call me a racist. I said, no, I'm calling you not considered. You're not considering how this is going to look. So people have to really love sadomasochistic pleasures.
Greg, midway through the Chance series, Chance experiences a personal tragedy and loss. Why did you choose this route, and what kind of flack did you get from pulling a George Martin on your fans?
Oh, I still hear about that. I have a friend another writer, who, whenever we'll discuss something, or we'll get into a little heated discussion about something, she'll always come back with me with that 2 words, dead boyfriend. It was really, really funny because it wasn't intended to be that way. It just happened that way, and that sounds like a cop-out, but it's really not. Spoiler, so at the end of the book, they're about to pull the plug on his partner because they don't think he's going to come back from the coma that he's in. And he leaves. Chance walks out. He's not there for it to happen. And so the next book in the series wasn't going to be with him dead. It was actually going to, it's all about timing too. The book came out in 2004. The next book in the series was going to be about the nursing home that he was still in because he didn't die, but there was an angel of death nurse in the nursing home. And the nursing home that I was using to research was St. Rita's in Chalmette, in St. Bernard Parish. And if you don't know anything about St. Rita's after Katrina, that was the nursing home where they left all the people to die in the flood after Katrina. And there was and when Katrina happened, hadn't started writing. I was in the midst of writing the book. I realized I can't write this book now because I can't write a book that's going to be, Katrina had already happened. It was in the aftermath of Katrina. It's like, I can't write this book now because it's about a world that doesn't exist anymore. And if Chance's partner is in a nursing home somewhere in New Orleans during Katrina, he's dead. He's going to be dead. And so it was just easier for me to go to the next book in the series in the aftermath of Katrina, and so I just had him, that when he left the hospital, he had died at that time, but that wasn't how it was supposed to be. Katrina did it. But it was also kind of a cop-out. It actually worked out career-wise and literarily better for me to have done that because it was kind of a cop-out to leave it like that. And then, oh, no, he's not dead after all, in the next book. But it was actually difficult to write that. That's probably the hardest book. The post-Katrina book was actually much easier to write than that one because it was so dark. That book was so dark. And it was painful and it was hard to write it because I was trying to imagine, to make it real, I had to imagine myself in that situation and having this happen to my partner. And it was incredibly, I drank a lot. And ironically, I had finished the book and turned it in, and we had a personal tragedy where I almost lost my partner like 2 months after I turned the book in. A friend of mine had always said, you should never write something like that. Never write something like that because it could happen. But ironically, having emotionally lived through it already and writing the book prepared me to handle it in real life better because I had already imagined the worst. And
Life
so,
imitating art.
yeah, so now I was like, okay, well now I just need to focus on how to get through this. We need to get through this. We need to get through this. We need to get through this, because I'd already been through the emotional thing with the book. And then when the book came out, everyone, of course, thought I'd written the book and based it on what had happened. It's like, well, no, actually, the book came out in September, and that happened in May. I write fast, but not that fast. But yeah, that book, unfortunately, that book is one of my favorites. And because of the timing of when it came out, I didn't do any promotional work for it. I didn't do anything for it because I just was not in a place where I could. I was too focused on getting through what we were getting through at the time. And so I always call it the lost book that just came and went and that nobody ever heard very much about. And people will often start the series with the post-Katrina book and skip the first two. They'll start on book 3 because it really was a shift. Because it's the New Orleans before Katrina, and then it's New Orleans after Katrina, and there's actually a clear breaking place in the series where you can start. So the Scotty series doesn't really have that. It just kind of goes. I didn't deal with Katrina in the Scotty series. The last Scotty book before Katrina was turned in 2 weeks before Katrina. It came out on that Tuesday after Katrina. It was the last book about pre-Katrina New Orleans published that was written before Katrina. Again, historical. And they wanted me to keep writing that series, but I would come back and say, you can't write a funny series about New Orleans right now. There's nothing funny about New Orleans right now. And so it took about 3 or 4 years before I got to a place where I could write about Scotty and his family and everyone again. And then that became the easiest way to deal with it was just like, all right, Katrina happened and it's been a couple of years and the cities, we got through it. And I just took the easy way out and just years have passed because years had passed and never dealt with it. And I think it was 2 paragraphs. Well, we didn't evacuate, that sort of thing.
Aside from several other talents, you have also been a playwright. You transformed Gilda Stories into Bones and Ash for the stage. You wrote a play based on James Baldwin's life called Waiting for Giovanni. And in 2017, you wrote a play about Alberta Hunter that Kim Walden of the Theatrus Reviews said, quote, playwright Gomez schools us on Alberta Hunter's doing and art. What brought your interest to Alberta Hunter?
I'm really indebted to Alberta in many ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this on the panel tomorrow with Martin Sherman and Moises Kaufman. I got to see her in New York about 3 or 4 times singing. And for those of you anybody who not know who Alberta Hunter is?
I didn't until I looked you up.
Okay. She was a blues singer and composer, and she wrote Bessie Smith's first big hit and recorded it before Bessie. And she was a recording artist, 1920s, 30s, 40s, internationally known and traveled, then retired and became a nurse for the next, 20 years, and then retired from that, and then got discovered again. So she sang at this little club in the Village until she died at the age of 89. And I went to see her a couple of times, and I took my grandmother when she was visiting me one weekend, because my grandmother had been a chorus girl and had, during the same period, she didn't know Alberta, but they were all in that mixed together of people doing arts, theater, singing, dancing, and people of color traversed a very specific path, because some theaters would not hire artists of color. So they all kind of knew each other. And so I take my grandmother to see Alberta at this joint, barbecue joint. It was very small, and it was always packed. And you had to make a reservation. It was always packed, and you didn't have to get there and be online to make sure you got your table, even though you had a reservation. So I said to my grandmother, "Nanny, you see all these young women in here?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "You know why they're here?" She said, "No, why?" I said, "Well, because they heard a rumor that Alberta Hunter is a lesbian." And my grandmother said, "Oh shit, everybody knew that." Forgive me, I'm going to tell the same story tomorrow. But I was like, oh, wow. And there she was in her 80s, and there was nothing about her that would make you know that. She was a very, she tried to be very ladylike. And everything she did was to kind of mask the fact that she was a lesbian. And, there was one biography of her, and as I'm looking at the pictures, I'm thinking, oh yeah, not only was she a lesbian, she was a butch. Because all the pictures of her off stage, she was wearing the equivalent of butch wear from the 20s and 30s. And so I became fascinated then in the 80s by someone who could survive that period as a lesbian that people knew, and they always just said she was a tough old bitch. And that was because she kept the rights to her music. She did not let anybody steamroll her. Unlike most of the black artists of that period, she kept the rights to her music.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We are going to hear from our authors, reading a small section, and then we will turn it over to the audience for any questions that you guys might have. Which one of you two would like to start?
I don't care, I'll go.
Thank you, God.
So a quick little introduction to what you're doing. And
Yeah, I will. I'm going to read a little section I almost never read. I don't think anybody gets killed here. This is in the first chapter, which takes place in 1850. The girl has escaped from slavery. She's rescued by two women, one named Gilda, one named Bird, and she lives with them for a number of years in their lovely home / bordello. And everybody knows there's something up with Gilda and Bird. I mean, in addition to them being lovers, there's something else up with them. But nobody, of course, talks about it. But the girl understands something's up. And at this point, Gilda, the elder, she's ready for the true death. Civil war is coming. She's done with war. She's been alive so long. She's seen enough wars. So she invites the young girl, who's now in her teens, to become part of their family. The girl picked her way through Gilda's thoughts. You're offering me time that's not really time? Time that's going to leave me by myself? I've seen this world moving in many different paths. I've watched each road with curiosity, anxious to see what we would make of our world. In Europe and to the south of us, it has been much the same. When I came here, the world was much larger, and the trip I had to make was as fearful as the one you've made. I was a girl too, much too strong to even be afraid. Each time I thought taking a stand, fighting a war, would bring the solution to the demons that haunted us. Each time I thought slavery or fanaticism would be banished from the earth with a law or a battle. Each time I've been wrong. I've run out of that youthful caring, and I know we must believe in possibilities in order to go on. I no longer believe, at least for myself. Both were silent. The girl was uncertain what questions she might even ask. It was like learning a new language. When she looked again into Gilda's eyes, she felt the pulsing of blood beneath the skin. She also sensed a rising excitement that was unfamiliar to her. The girl heard an edge in Gilda's voice, but was fascinated by that blood and the swirling colors in Gilda's eyes. The girl felt a chill, as if Gilda lowered her lids and shut out the sun. And for a moment she was afraid. The room was all shadows, unnatural silence, as Gilda disappeared behind her closed eyes. Then Gilda opened her eyes, and the girl felt herself drawn into the flowing energy. Her arms and legs became weak. She heard a soft humming that sounded like her mother, long dead. She couldn't look away from Gilda's gaze, which held her. Yet she felt free and would have laughed if she'd had the strength to open her mouth. She whispered inside, yes. She sensed rather than felt Gilda pull her into her arms. She closed her eyes and her muscles softened under the touch of Gilda's hand on her arm. She curled her long body into Gilda's lap like a child safe in her mother's arms. She felt a sharpness at her neck and heard the soothing song. Gilda kissed her on the forehead and neck where the pain had been, catching her in a powerful undertow. The girl clung to Gilda, sinking deeper into a dream, barely hearing Gilda as she said, "Now you must drink." She held the girl's head to her breast and in a quick gesture opened the skin of her chest. She pressed the girl's mouth to the red life that seeped slowly from her. Soon the flow was a tide that left Gilda weak. She pulled the suckling girl away and closed the wound. The girl sat in Gilda's lap until the fire died. As the sun crept into the dark room, she carried the girl upstairs to the bedroom where they slept the day through. Gilda awoke at dusk, the girl still tight in her arms. She slipped from the bed and went downstairs to put a tub of water to boil. When she returned to finish dressing, the girl watched her silently. "Bird will be here soon. You mustn't be afraid. You will ask her to complete the circle. It is she who will make you our daughter. Will you remember that?" "Yes," the girl said weakly. "You must also remember later, when time weighs on you like hard earthenware strapped to your back, it is for love that we do this." Gilda's eyes were fiery and unfocused. The power of them lulled the girl into sleep, although she felt a pang of unease and hunger inside of her. Gilda's lips again brushed her forehead, then she slept without dreaming.
And Mr. Greg Herren.
I'm going to be reading a portion of a short story that I wrote that, as I'm looking it over, is much more bitter than I thought.
You say bitter or better?
Bitter. It actually is a short story that's going up on, I guess, as a Kindle single this weekend. I don't know what. Someone's talking me through the process of doing this, so I don't really understand it because I'm not very technological. But this story was inspired by a conversation I had with a really good friend of mine who's also a writer named Michael Thomas Ford. It's called Quiet Desperation. And the setup for the story is two authors became friends at the beginning of their career, and one became hugely successful as a literary writer, critically acclaimed with lots of money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the other one, who is just as talented, never quite makes it and has to ghostwrite and take all these other gigs to make a living as a writer. The literary writer dies and leaves all of his copyrights and his papers to his friend. And so it was just a random thought that struck me as funny. I may even have laughed. I was sitting there in my easy chair streaming some lame television show someone with little to no talent was getting a fortune for writing, and yes, feeling sorry for myself. I don't mind admitting that when you're a writer, shitty day after shitty day leads you to drinking too much wine and smoking too much pot and wondering why you even bother, and maybe it was time to just give it all up because it's never going to happen and you've wasted too many years of your life chasing this elusive dream, that after years of working hard and pushing yourself and doing everything your agent and your editor and your publisher ask you to do, no matter how humiliating, you still find yourself not making the kind of money where you won't have to worry every month about paying your bills, taking gigs you don't want to, but you need to pay the bills. That particular day, I'd gotten an email from an editor about a short story I'd been asked to write for an anthology. 2 rounds of edits, and then out of nowhere, I'm so sorry, I'm not going to be able to use your story after all. But I might be able to use it if I get to do another volume, because yes, of course, by all means, please sit on my work for some more time without paying for it, because maybe you might use it another time. Yeah, that and $200 will pay the power bill. I'd stopped myself from writing the blistering, bridge-burning response I wanted to send, and just deleted her email unanswered. I'd also lost a ghostwriting gig that day. I'd written 10 of the 20 or so books in a series for tweens about a bunch of slutty, privileged girls at a private school over the last 3 years, and was hoping to write at least another 3 this year until I woke up that morning to an email from my agent telling me the publisher had decided to go in another direction with the series, whatever the hell that meant, and so they were going to hire a fresh batch of ghostwriters. Don't worry though, Barry, she'd closed with. I'm sure something else will turn up soon. I'll start sending out feelers. Don't get upset. Something will turn up. Feelers. Something will turn up. Great. The anthology editor's email had come about an hour later, and that's when I gave up on getting anything done that day. It was only 1 o'clock, so what? I opened a bottle of Chardonnay and rolled a joint and turned on the television and spent the afternoon turning my mind into mush, trying to forget the 50 grand or so of income the loss of the series meant, and wondering how I was going to keep paying the bills. There was still money owed to me out there, and it would be spring royalty season soon, but my bank account was dwindling with more going out than coming in. And that's when the joke came to me. I should dig out that old manuscript and send it to Hunter's agent. I bet he could sell it for several $100,000 at least, with Hunter's name on it. It was funny, wasn't it? Trying to pass off my old manuscript as one of Hunter's. What a great joke it would be if I could fool his agent. 6-figure book deal within a month, I thought, pouring another glass of wine, if not a bidding war. Hunter's agent, Lester Doheny, had been pestering me about Hunter's papers since the day they arrived. I knew there wasn't anything unpublished in there. No secret lost manuscript like Lester was hoping. Hunter hated writing and never wrote anything he wasn't getting paid for. All those papers were just versions of novels and short stories he'd refined down and eventually published. Lester should know that better than anyone. But still, he held out hope. I laughed a little bit as I reached for the pipe for another hit. Fireflies was the name of the manuscript, my attempt at the great American novel. I'd written and rewritten and paid editors to give me opinions and sent it to agents and used their feedback, but no one wanted it. It was the book I thought would get me out of the world of ghostwriting books for long-dead authors and turning audio recordings of D-list celebrities into memoirs or writing novels for them for a 5-figure check while they make 7 figures and went on talk shows. Oops, signed confidentiality agreements for all of them, so let's just pretend I never mentioned any of that. In my drunken stone stupor, I could hear Hunter telling me to do it. I stumbled into my kitchen, sat down at my computer, and typed out an email to Lester. Lester, don't want to get your hopes up, but I found a couple of pieces of a manuscript in Hunter's papers. I just started going through them. I will, of course, keep an eye out for the rest. Best, Barry. After I hit send, I had a moment of buyer's remorse. I could always pretend I never found the rest, couldn't I? I woke up the next morning not certain I'd really done it, that I'd just imagined doing it, until I saw Lester's response. Terrific news! Keep me posted. If there's at least 2/3 of a manuscript, I can find someone to finish it. I can't tell you how thrilled and happy I am. There's no telling what other treasures you might find in his papers, short stories, even the memoir he was talking about writing. I'll put out some feelers to see how much interest there is. Talk soon, Lester. I could find someone else to finish it, rankled. Because why would Lester ever consider asking me to do it? That was the moment I decided that I was going to revise my manuscript in Hunter style and send it to Lester. Fuck you very much, Lester. And it just goes downhill from there.
Thank you both. I will turn questions over from the audience at this point, if anybody has any questions. Yes, sir.
I finished your book, Jewelle, about a couple months ago, and the very first thing I thought of was, why the hell isn't this a Netflix series? Have you been approached or even broached the idea of doing something like that?
Well, funny you should ask. Yeah, my agent, I mean, this is so bizarre, is negotiating with 3 different people right now to do, a limited series. And, people have said to me, it seems kind of cinematic, and I'm going, is that a way of saying I write run-on sentences? Because I love those long sentences, because they feel like they're moving.
Me too.
So literally at this very moment. So we'll see, I think it's a time that one could sell something like this. I mean, as I say, post-TB, True Blood, anything is possible because they had everything in there.
That's the truth.
So, fingers crossed.
Other questions?
Oh, come on.
Well, I have another one for Jewelle. How do you feel that Gilda compares to, say, Miriam from Whitley Strieber's The Hunger? There's not a lot of lesbian vampire novels out there, so the comparison has to be made.
Yeah. Well, in The Hunger, they were white. That would be one thing.
That's a big difference.
I don't want to be like an essentialist. I think that to me, it's The Hunger is, despite it being beautiful and glamorous, it's very dark. And despite Gilda starting in slavery and facing all of the things that she faces through the lens of a woman of color, I think Gilda Stories is a bright and happy novel, if one can say that about a vampire novel. It's meant to serve as a vehicle for how do we think about change? How do we think about our social responsibility? And Gilda is a character. I built a community around her that has social responsibility and feels connection with mortals, not just a predator. And so with The Hunger, that predator quality is really still there.
Very much so.
Yeah, and so I think that's a very big difference. And I didn't write Susan Sarandon apart. My eternal regret. Maybe if it goes to screen, I can redo.
Yes, ma'am.
Question kind of for both of you. Dealing with real people's lives, Greg, you kind of alluded to it like it was a problem because of what happened at St. Rita's that then you couldn't really use nursing homes. And Jewelle, I was wondering for you about writing about James Baldwin. What are the openings when you take a life that's so rich and you're writing about it, and then what are the pitfalls and the things you have to be careful of? And Greg, you said you just felt you
It's, for me, I love history and I love biographies, and one of the reasons I don't write history or biographies is because I like to make shit up. And you can't do that in nonfiction. Or you can, it just doesn't go
It's called creative.
Right. But there's, I've thought about it before, and I've done some things where I generally will base things on true events, but will fictionalize the people. Like one of my books was a very important plot point was the fire at the upstairs bar here in New Orleans, but I didn't use any of the real people because that felt invasive. And I'm always really, I mean, people ask if you base characters on real people, and I always say my stock answer is I only base it on people I can't stand, because then I make them so awful that if they sue me, they have to admit in court that they're really It's a win-win for me regardless. But yeah, I think that it's tough. It's very, very, very tough to write about real people. I think it would be easier to do it in a historical context if you were writing about. It's much easier to write about people in a historical context when there's no one left alive who can tell you that you were wrong. You know, because they will tell you that you're wrong.
In the Gilda Stories, I actually include people I know, because I wanted to document a certain kind of period in life for the lesbian community. So there's a chapter in which Gilda is a singer, and these women all come to see her sing, and they're based on the writer Alexis DeVoe used to have a salon called Flamboyant Lady Salon in Brooklyn, where women went to do their work, and it's where I first read Gilda out loud. So I kind of wanted to honor them, and it was very sweet because everybody recognized themselves. And I was very precise about what they looked like, how they sounded. And they're only, like, they're not ongoing characters, they're just a little section. So I felt really easy about that, and I was trying to capture something for posterity, and that was a lot of fun. But the plays, it's very exciting to me to study someone's words, ideas, manner, and then figure out how can I approximate that on the stage without using their words. That's the first thing, because I did not want to have to deal with the Baldwin estate, because they're very picky. And so I read and reread everything Baldwin had written, everything that had been written about him, and then I created a character, Jimmy, who I feel approximates him very well. And so as I sat down to write, his language, his voice was in my head, and so it just flowed out like that, because I think I had immersed myself so deeply. With Alberta, it was different because there's very little written about her. There's one biography, not well written. She was very closed-mouthed, so she wouldn't talk about her relationships that much in print. I was able to have a conversation with the lovely jazz writer, Chris Albertson, who wrote the biography of Bessie Smith that Queen Latifah's TV film was based on. And Chris lives in New York, and I talked to him on the phone several times to get a sense of her. And he one of the things he said, well, you almost had to jolly her until something slipped out, because she was still so protected, as if it was still the 20s, and people were going to, I don't know, not hire her. So I got more of a sense of her from that, and looking at videos of her. And once I started writing, it's a character. I'm trying to approximate the emotional inner life, but nothing in the Alberta play or the Baldwin play it's based on a fact per se. You know, I know that Alberta had a lover for many years, and that she tried to keep it on the down low. I know that James Baldwin had a hard time, was given a hard time by people for writing Giovanni's Room.
His editor told him to burn the manuscript.
Right, right. So that's what led me to think about writing a play about that moment where he's trying to decide, should he burn the manuscript or not? And how do I keep people interested in that, even though they know he didn't? You know, but that crisis of, do you hide yourself or not hide yourself, which I think is a crisis all of us face, writer or not. So, and how to write it like that. So you have to give yourself over, and then not worry if it's exactly like them. You know, you're writing a character.
Yeah, it's never going to be exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
This lady in the red.
I was going to ask if your plays have been published and we can find them.
No, they have not. I was thinking about
Bone and Ash was published.
Bones and Ash. Actually,
Yeah,
that's
with Gilda
true.
Stories.
Bones and Ash was published in a Gilda and Bones and Ash was published by what is it called? Book of the Month Club or something like that. And it is available. If you go online for remaindered books, you can find that. The other
It's
two,
a classic. It's one of their classics.
Triangle Classics,
Yes.
right? And you can find them online. But the other two have not yet been published. The Baldwin play is going to open in New York in the summer. And so I'm hoping after that I'll be able to get the Baldwin play published. Or I'll publish it myself. You can do everything yourself now online.
You can see little clips of both of her plays on YouTube. There's
Yes.
little clips of like 3-minute clips of both of those plays.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
How about the Hunter play? Is that
What is that
It's
called? I'm
It's
sorry.
called Leaving the Blues. There's a great clip of Leaving the Blues on YouTube. Toshi Reagan wrote the closing song, and so that's threaded through. So that's, but it's still, you know, it just closed this past spring, so it's still early days yet for Alberta, and what's going to happen with her. And I have to figure out how to get the rights to the song, the 3 songs that I use that are not Toshi's but are old songs, before I can send the play around.
More questions? I have one more for Greg then. How did the Saints and Sinners Festival come into founding? You and Paul founded it. How did it develop?
It was one of those.
In 3 minutes.
It was one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. When Paul and I had worked for, this is way back in the dark ages, I was the editor of the Lambda Book Report, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now the lambdaliterary.org website. But it was actually a print publication, and I was the editor. And Paul was the executive director of the Lambda Literary Foundation at the same time. And they had previously put on a couple of writers' conferences, but they had stopped doing it, and Outright had gone away. And so when we went to work for them, part of the reason they hired Paul to be the executive director was because he had worked for the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival here in New Orleans for several years, so he knew how to do a conference, a writers' conference. And so when we worked for Lambda, we put on 2. There was one the first one was in Philadelphia, and the second one was in San Francisco.
That was Behind the Mask?
Yeah. And when we moved, then we left the Lambda Literary Foundation and came back to New Orleans because, no offense to anyone, but DC, no. Especially after living here. Especially after living here. It's hard to live anywhere after you've lived in New Orleans. It's because you just get so used to New Orleans. It's like the rest of the world doesn't seem real. And when we came back here, they didn't do another one. They'd stopped. And seriously, it's honest to God, began as because we wanted to do something so that all of our friends would come to New Orleans. talent. Like see everybody all at the same time. And we tied it with Gene Redman. We tied it to the No AIDS Task Force. And it just started, and it started very small, 15 years ago. And all of our it was not in a hotel, all of our venues were in bars.
Right.
All the panels were in bars.
It's fun to do
various-
a workshop in a
various-
bar.
various gay
Cocktail,
bars in the
yeah.
French Quarter. And there was always a bartender, and everybody could drink, and it was we had some pretty amazing closing receptions.
So I'm hearing you tell us that we should bring our roadies for the afternoon sessions today.
We had, I remember the first few years we had the closing reception was at the Bourbon Pub, and Rain Vodka sponsored it, and they literally brought cases and cases and cases of vodka to the bar, so everything was free.
That's a hardship.
So no one had to pay for anything. And the No AIDS Task Force person, who was the development chair for the No AIDS Task Force, was like, if this stuff isn't drank, we have to take it back to the office and get rid of it. And I remember somebody told me about that first opening reception, was like, one moment I was standing out on the balcony talking about literature with Edmund White and Andrew Halloran, and then the next thing I knew, it was 1 o'clock in the morning and I was in a drag show. And that was my all-time favorite club.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's evolved, and it used to always be in May, and now it's the same weekend as the Williams Festival. And it's been a lot of fun. We've met a lot of people, and a lot of people have come here and learned things and found book publishing contracts and made connections and stuff, and it's a really important thing. It was, for the longest time, it was the only one of its kind. I think there's a couple of other ones now, various places around the country, but Paul puts his heart and soul into this. It's what keeps him sane with the Williams Festival.
Well, we are out of time, so I just want to say thank you very much. And please help me thank our guests. I will. I'm going to go home, edit it. I will have